everybody and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be setting up my Stephen Quiller Porcelain palette. Now if you haven't already seen it and you're interested in a full review of this porcelain palette, I did recently upload that video, so I'll go ahead and link it up if you're interested. But in this video I'm going to be setting it up. Now, I've been very excited to do this, and it's been long awaited for me. As many of you already know, my original Stephen Quiller porcelain palette, which I owned and loved for many years, was destroyed in an accident, and it devastated me. But today we're going to move on, and I'm very excited to do so because with fall coming, there are a lot of autumn kind of watercolor paintings that I have in my head, ideas that I have in mind that I would like to share with you guys on this channel in the future. So if you're interested in seeing what colors I'm going to be using and what brands, what colors as a professional artist that I like to use, then just keep watching because I'm going to be setting this palette up in this video today. So what I have here is a piece of watercolor paper that I have used a mock-up kind of what this palette looks like inside. And I'm going to be using this as the swatch card. Now I already mentioned in my review video that his name is large and in charge, really loud on the front cover, and I don't like that, but we're going to just go ahead and conveniently cover that up with this swatch card. So I'm going to be filling that out as well, and I'm going to be giving you some thoughts on, whoops, sorry about that. Like I said, I'm going to be filling this out in just a moment, and I'm going to be setting up this watercolor palette, giving you some of my thoughts on what colors I'll be using and why I like those colors. So you might find that enjoyable, might find that interesting. I hope so. So I've got several of my professional watercolors off to the side here, and I'd like to set this palette up almost identical to the original palette, which I have a picture of it off to the side, my old palette that I no longer have. So what that means is lots and lots of M-gram watercolors. They are my favorite. And since this is going to be a studio only palette, you know, porcelain palette that's rather heavy would obviously be a studio option. I'm not worried about the honey in the paints. It's not a problem for me, and it's an advantage because even if the palette goes untouched for many months, I can still come back to these paints and they just melt. They just re-wet beautifully. So you can set this palette up the way that Stephen Quiller recommends it according to his rules of color theory, but nah, that's not what we're going to do. I'm going to do it my way. The only change that I had thought about making to this palette from the old one was the use of Prussian Blue. Now, M-gram is still saying that this is a light fast of 1, and when I look up the pigment information on Dick Blick's website, it says in relation to the permanence, it says Prussian Blue is a light, fast, and permanent pigment in all techniques except for fresco. When mixed with zinc white in watercolor or tempera form, it fades upon exposure to light, but completely regains its chromatic strength in the dark. Modern manufacturing techniques have made this tendency less of an issue in recent years. And then it goes on to say that it's moderately toxic if ingested. It will emit toxic hydrogen cyanide gas if heated or exposed to ultraviolet radiation or treated with acid, blah, blah, blah. So we're not going to do that. But this is a very historical hue, and one that is very important to me. That beautiful, lovely Sleeping Beauty turquoise type color, and the granulation, it's sedimentary and it's very liftable. So I've done my own light fast tests with Prussian Blue, and I had no issue with this one. Again, this is the PB27 from M-gram, and it is a light fast of 1. I don't really think it's an issue as much as some people like to make out that it is, but now I don't feel 100% the same about it. So I don't know. Let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts on Prussian Blue are. So the old watercolor palette that I had by Stephen Quiller, what I did was I arranged it in such a way where I had all of my pure colors would go around the wheel in, you know, essentially rainbow order. And then I would have my earth tones in the 8 wells around the corners, like burnt sienna, raw sienna, yellow ochre, quinacridone gold, burnt umber, raw umber, although I don't think I'm going to put raw or burnt umber on this palette. But I am going to set this palette up relatively similar to the exact same way, and I'm going to be using all of my favorites and all of my absolute must-have colors for this palette setup, which means a lot of yellows, a lot of reds. Like half the palette is going to be reds. Red is a very important color to me. It has the longest wavelength of any other color, and it's always been very obvious to me that red was the color of strength. It was the color of power and passion and courage, and was one of the most strongest, most important, influential colors in an artist's palette. So I've got the most reds. Do you need as many reds as I'm about to show you? Absolutely not. You can get by with just 2, a warm and a cool version of each, but I've got many, many yellows here. And, excuse me, many, many reds here. So right up at the top of the palette is going to be Azo Yellow, or Cerulean. Azo Yellow is a really light, fast color. It's very transparent, very, very strong. It is the strongest cool yellow that I've ever been able to find, and I like it much better than Hansa Yellow Light, and it's more absolutely permanent. Next to that, I'm going to have Hansa Yellow Deep, which the M. Graham's version is called Hansa Yellow Deep, but really if you were to get this in Daniel Smith or any other brand, it would be Hansa Yellow Medium. Perfect, middle of the road, neutral yellow. Very, very clear, transparent, visually eye clean, just the perfect yellow. You can't go wrong with that neutral yellow. Then I'm going to use Gamboge, which is going to be my warm yellow. Indian Yellow, which is going to be even warmer still, leaning toward yellow orange. And then after that, we're going to use Pyrrole Scarlet by Daniel Smith. Now this is my favorite warm red, my favorite scarlet of any brand. I like it better even than the M. Graham's version, which I have also, which is called Scarlet Pyrrole. And that's more orange, so actually that one will come first and then that scarlet. But I absolutely have to have that, and it does come in the Essentials set, by the way, in case you were interested. Then after that, I've got Naphtha Red, which Naphtha Red and Pyrrole Red are very, very similar in hue. The only difference is the Pyrrole Red is going to be more expensive. It's a Series 3 pigment, and it's more light fast. So instead of a light fast of 2, it's a light fast of 1. However, sometimes I like the Naphtha Red because it's a little bit more liftable and a little bit more gentle than the Pyrrole Red, but Pyrrole Red in general is one of my favorite reds. After that, I'm going to be using Permanent Alizarin Crimson. This is actually another Pyrrole pigment. This is their Ruby Pyrrole, I believe. Yeah, so this is Pyrrole Ruby PR264. This is very light fast, very permanent, and I think that M. Graham does the best Permanent Alizarin Crimson in my opinion. Hands down, no questions asked. After that, I'm going to be using their Quinacridone Rose. My absolute favorite rose comes from M. Graham. After that, I'm going to be using Quinacridone Pink by Daniel Smith, which sits right between the Quinacridone Rose and Quinacridone Magenta. I think I talked about this in my recent Winsor & Newton review, that Winsor & Newton's Quinacridone Magenta, and I recently talked with another artist who agreed with me, is the most vibrant magenta that you can find. I do like Daniel Smith's, but it's a lower chroma version of the color. It's not quite as bright, and M. Graham doesn't make a magenta, so as it stands right now, Winsor & Newton's is the one that I will always repurchase. After that color, I have Quinacridone Violet, which would be the closest thing to the Quinacridone Magenta, but it's more toward the purple, certainly. This is a beautiful, beautiful color, very pigmented, very transparent. Love that color. It's just like the perfect kind of wine kind of color. After that, I have Daniel Smith's Quinacridone Purple, which was the star of that Roses painting, and it is so vibrant and beautiful. It is like a really warm, kind of glowing version of like Dioxazine Violet. If you wanted something to compare it to, it's like a grape juice kind of color. And that is PV55, and that will come after that shade. And then for the Ultramarines that I do occasionally do some floral painting, and so I like to have some granulating, lower tinting strength versions of the violet. So like Quinacridone Violet, Quinacridone Purple, Dioxazine Violet, they are very heavily staining colors. So you might find them harder to control because they're not liftable, they're not as goof proof. So like that Roses painting that I did with this Quinacridone Purple, you really have to know what you're doing. There's not a lot of room for error with these colors, so you might want to be more of an advanced artist to use them. But colors like Ultramarine Pink, Ultramarine Violet, and Ultramarine Violet Deep, these colors are going to be much more forgiving in terms of if you make a mistake, you'll be able to lift them out a little bit more. So, and they're more calm and gentle, more delicate in nature, and they granulate as where the staining colors would not. So it's nice to have a variety. I'm gonna do the Ultramarine Violet Deep after Ultramarine Violet, and then I'm going to do the Dioxazine Purple. Now, M. Graham's version of the Dioxazine Purple is a little bit less chromatic than Winsor & Newton's or even Daniel Smith's, but it's more natural looking, and I found that it was easier to pull it off in a landscape. And it's more light fast. It's a more light fast version of that pigment. After that, I'm going to use the Ultramarine Violet, which is more blue than the Ultramarine Violet Deep. It's much more nearing a true Ultramarine Blue, but it is different. And that leads me to my Ultramarine Blue, which will come next. I love Ultramarine Blue. It is my favorite blue. I cannot be without Ultramarine Blue, and M. Graham does my absolute favorite. It's very finely milled, it's the most saturated, and I like when my pigments are ultra finely milled. Sometimes I like them to granulate, but if you want a non-granulating version of Ultramarine Blue for like realism, when you need it to lay down smooth, M. Graham has you covered on that one. After that, the next color that's going on my palette is Anthroconone Blue. This color is gorgeous. It is absolutely light fast. It's a Series 3 pigment. I was introduced to Anthroconone Blue by the brand Golden. It was part of a Golden acrylic paint set that I had. This color, when you see the swatch of it, you're going to know why this is so special. It's kind of like the ultramarine version of Prussian Blue, if what I just said made sense. So you know how you've got Phthalo Blue and you've got Prussian Blue. So Prussian Blue is a little bit more earthy and it granulates, as where that Phthalo Blue is a little bit more pure and more staining. Anthroconone Blue is similar to the Prussian Blue, only it's more toward the red. And it's just absolutely gorgeous. I love this color, and so I'll always continue to repurchase that. After the Anthroconone Blue, I have the Prussian Blue. That was what I put on my old palette. But I've been thinking about replacing it with the Aqua Green by Winsor & Newton. They're not identical, but they're similar enough. But because the aqua green is a phthalo pigment, it doesn't granulate, it's not sedimentary, it doesn't lift. So the hues are similar, but the working characteristics are not. I really do love Prussian Blue, and it's, you know, it's the blue that Vincent van Gogh used. It's such a historical hue, and you know, I don't think that it's really that much of an issue, but you know, again, now I don't feel right about it anymore. After Prussian Blue, I have Phthalo Blue. Phthalo Blue is a must-have color. After Phthalo Blue would come, of course, Phthalo Green. And if you mix Phthalo Blue and Phthalo Green together, you will get this aqua green shade. So it's really not a must-have color. And then for my yellow green, I'm going to use Sap Green. So that will sit between the yellow and the phthalo. So those will be my pure pigment colors all the way around. And you can see that most of these colors are in fact the M-Gram paints, which are my favorite paints. But I also have a palette set up full of the Daniel Smith paints, and I recently did a video updating that palette, so I'll link that up if you're interested. And the Daniel Smith paints are lovely. They really, really are. But M-Gram are my absolute favorite. So up here toward the yellow and the orange side of the color wheel, I'm going to have my earth yellows and my earth orange. And the most vibrant versions of those colors would be Daniel Smith's transparent Pyrrole orange, which is really a beautiful earthy orange, kind of earthy red shade. And nickel quinacridone gold. I like that M-Gram is being honest, letting you know that there's more than just one pigment in here, versus the Winsor & Newton, who are not being honest that it's a hue. So that's what I've got up here in this corner. Down here I'm going to have my yellow ochre. Yellow ochre and transparent red iron oxide. This is a must-have color for me. It's a transparent, more fiery orange version of the burnt sienna, and I think they execute this color, M-Gram, far better than Winsor & Newton. Right next door over here I've got raw sienna and burnt sienna. Raw sienna is just a little more red than yellow ochre. You don't have to have both on one palette, absolutely not. But if you've been an artist for as long as I have, it's nice to have color variety. And then up here I have Terra Rosa. Now this color goes by several different names. Sometimes it's called Indian red or Tuscan red. M-Gram's version, they're calling this Terra Rosa. This is synthetic iron oxide, PR101. Even though this is the same pigment as the transparent red iron oxide, they're both, you know, rust, right? But the Indian red or Terra Rosa is going to be very opaque in mass tone, as where this one is very transparent. This is a beautiful color. It's much more dull also and more red than that one. And I do really like this, but I don't use it ever at full strength. And then for that last corner, I was thinking it could that well could share the spot with burnt umber and raw umber, like a dollop in you know, on either end of the corner, because it is such a large well. I don't use burnt umber and raw umber as much as I used to, and just to let you know, M-Grams does contain manganese, so something to keep in mind. But I'm always using either burnt sienna or transparent red iron oxide and ultramarine blue. So if I mix a little bit of that ultramarine blue into the whatever burnt sienna I'm using that day, then I'll get a very natural brown that will be harmonious with the rest of the painting. So I very rarely bring in raw or burnt umber, so I don't know if I'm gonna even put them on my palette there. I may instead perhaps choose to put the aqua green on the palette, but I don't really think I need it. Some other colors that I have here, I have the Iridescents from Daniel Smith. I would never put them on my main palette. I have them in a separate flower dish because I don't want that shimmer or that mica to contaminate my pure colors. I also have quite a few of the Daniel Smith tubes in here, a couple other colors, but these are the colors that I'm going to use to set up this palette. And when I'm out of that Hansa Yellow Deep from M. Graham, I might replace it with the Hansa Yellow Medium from Daniel Smith. These colors are very comparable, and I'll bet they're even the same pigment. PY97, yes. So this is, I don't know why they're calling it Deep. It really is the medium. That nice taxi cab yellow. Alright, so hold everything. Just hold the phone, hold the presses, hold everything. Just hold it. I'm just getting done finishing up, setting up my Stephen Quiller Porcelain watercolor palette. Everything was going good. And I had finished up, I gotten the last of the paint out of my 5 milliliter tube of the Daniel Smith Transparent Pyrrole Orange. The pigment is P071. I love this color. It is a gorgeous, earthy, red orange, but it was mostly empty. So I had picked up a new tube. I thought since I fell in love with the color so much, I would pick up the 15 milliliter tube. Again, exactly the same information, transparent pyrrole orange, same pigment, blah, blah, blah. Can you see the problem? I don't know if you're gonna even be able to see, but I noticed it right away. I was like, whoa, there's a difference in hue. The new one is much lighter. So I ended up swatching it out, and sure enough, they're different. So the new one is on the left. As you can see, it is lighter and less pigmented, and the old one is on the right. It is darker and more red, more of an earthy red. What the heck? What the heck, Daniel Smith? What is going on here? I loved that pigment just the way it was, and now look at it. Look what you have done to it. I don't even know what to say. Anybody else? Anybody else experiencing this, or is it just me? Alright, so I wanted to finish up the video by showing you the hue that I made. So this is the original transparent pyrrole orange, the hue that I mixed, and the new transparent pyrrole orange. Hopefully you can really see the difference. It's absolutely changed. Now, the website doesn't say that there was ever a change to this color and how they manufacture it. I don't know, I'm lost. But here I've got them, the original squirted out and let to dry, and the hue that I made, I just mixed a small amount of that permanent alizarin crimson from M. Graham, which is ruby pyrrole. So they're both pyrrole pigments, and I didn't seem to have any issues mixing the M. Graham and the Daniel Smith together, but you can see it's really, really close. And that's more usable to me, and I'll use it up this way, but this is the pigment fresh out of the tube now. So what is going on? I'm not happy with it. I'm really not happy about that at all. I don't like the change, and I would be very interested to know if any of you have experienced problems like that, because that is a huge shift in color from the tube that I bought several years ago originally and the tube that I just purchased fresh. Alright guys, so that is the end of the video. I went ahead and I taped my swatch chart onto the lid, and I was sure to cover up that Stephen Quiller signature, and I put my own artist signature on there because it's my palette. And you know what? Y'all might think I'm being a little petty, but there it is. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed up the footage of me swatching out these colors just so that you don't have to sit through that if you didn't want to. And then, but I did film it, and I jabbered on for quite some time. I went ahead and I talked about the colors and my thoughts on them and why I selected them. So I think I will upload that real-time footage as a separate video, just in case you don't want to sit through that, and I could completely understand as I blabbered on for like, I don't know, a half hour. But there was some interesting information in there. So in case I do that, I did want to repeat that in terms of setting up a porcelain palette like that, like this, because you're putting out a lot of paint, the more paint that you put out, the more time that it takes to dry. So a full pan will take more than a half pan. And these wells, which are rather deep, will take more time than, you know, a full or a half pan, obviously, because the more paint, the more moisture the paint can hold. So hopefully that makes sense. These colors were what I would call about semi-soft set at about 4 days. So, you know, soft set meaning that they're skinning over and that there is a somewhat dry layer on the top. But something to keep in mind with setting up a large palette like this, your M-gram paints are going to take the longest to dry at about 2 weeks before I would call them solid, okay? Daniel Smith sets up the quickest, it seems, and Winsor & Newton takes maybe just a little bit longer than the Daniel Smith, I found. Now, it also depends on the color and the pigment. Of course, some pigments take longer to dry than others. Ultramarines set up usually the quickest. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that I don't like working from the paint when it's wet or even when it's in this semi-soft set state. That's because if at this point a color contamination was to happen, there would be nothing I could do. The entire well of color would be contaminated. If it's fully dry, you can then just wipe that layer off and the rest of the paint is perfectly fine. And also, you don't have to, it's just more convenient. It's not as sticky, it's not grabbing the brush, it's not, you know, getting gobs of color. So I would personally wait. And of course, with my M-gram paints, I think that they're a studio option. I do have some metal boxes filled with M-gram paints, but I don't take them out with me painting plein air. I would take my Daniel Smiths or Winsor & Newton, but really Daniel Smith. So one way that you can tell for sure whether or not they're dry, or one indicator of how they're drying, is that they'll go from being very, very glossy and wet looking to a semi-matte look. They'll start to lose that sheen as they dry down. And some colors will go completely matte, like Ultramarine Blue, not the M-gram one, but Daniel Smith's and Winsor & Newton's will go completely matte. So that really is today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching as always and for sticking with me. I hope that you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Give me a thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe. And let me know if you would be interested in me uploading the real-time footage and talking about these colors as I swatch them out, because I think I'm going to do that. So again, as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!